Welcome to Aviation Highlights. I'm Paul Pakusch. This is the second episode in a series of programs about aviation in and around the Rochester area. We're at the southwest end of runway 422 at the Rochester Airport to start off this particular program. I'm standing at the southwest end of runway 422 at the Rochester Airport. It's a medium-sized airport as far as city airports go, not nearly as big as, say, Chicago or New York, but it's large enough that it needs a lot of important services to keep it functioning properly. And the manager who oversees all those services is Airport Manager Sam Cooper.
It was right after Pearl Harbor. I wanted to get into aviation, although I had never gone off the ground in my life. I decided I'd join the Naval Air Force. I had that in mind. I had in mind getting my wings and flying a flying boat, and by God, I got both of them. Right after I come out of service, I went to work for Wilbur Wright, Director of Monroe County Parks. And I was over there 14 years, and I heard this position was open, and I applied for it, and by God, they transferred me out here. That's 15 years ago.
In order to get these pictures out on the runway, taxiway, and ramp areas, we had to ride in this car with a rotating alert light on top. The car must get clearances from the tower to travel to any part of the airfield, just as an aircraft must get clearance. The tower must know at all times of any potential obstruction to other aircraft.
We've doubled the size of the airport since I've taken over. As a matter of fact, when I took over, we were about $1,800,000 in the red. About 8 years ago, we went from red to black. We're making money at the airport. We found, not belittling the previous administration, that is the airport administration, we found contracts that didn't have any escalation clauses. There was apparently never any value to the contracts made, no appraisals, and they were just kind of given away. And we found, for an example, where they were giving land away at 3 and 4 cents a square foot for 20, 25-year contracts. When those contracts are up, now we're charging 24, 25 cents. Well, I should say 21 to 25 cents.
As airport manager, Sam Cooper is responsible for the terminal, the runways, the firefighters, and maintenance.
In the last 3 years, we figured we were closed about 24 hours total in 3 years. Closed because of, we just couldn't fly. And I might add that was a result of poor visibility. But I've got an outstanding crew, and there's only 15 of them to maintain this airport in pretty good shape. Do a beautiful job.
What kind of a relationship does your office have with the airlines?
I think a very close relationship. We seem to get along very well with one another. We try to fulfill any requests they have. Sometimes they're kind of demanding, but we do the best we can. Big problem, of course, is getting the runways open in time. 15 years ago when we started out here, if it took us 2 or 3 hours to clean a runway, it was no major problem. Today, if it takes more than an hour, we've got aircraft stacked up way back Chicago, Los Angeles, that are not allowed to leave until this particular airport's open. The old days, they could come over and fly in a holding pattern overhead, but you can't do that anymore. If it's a known hole, they can't do it.
Why does Greater Rochester International Airport need to be expanded?
Well, this airport was built many years ago when, for example, we had the Convair 440 and some of these smaller aircraft that carried 25, 30 people. Now we got 30 people coming in. We didn't have too much problem with the whole room. The bag belt was small. Most cases it was just a pass-through. There's no belt whatsoever. The 25 people departing didn't take much of a counter, that is ticket counter. No problem. Today, the same aircraft coming in is now holding up to 150, 75 people. We've got to expand everything, the spectrum of terminal operation. First of all, we got to start with more ease in getting in here. Right now, you come into the very dangerous, in my opinion, intersection of Brooks and Buell Road over here. We're going to eliminate that by going further west on Brooks, going to the right and making a circle back across the railroad track just east of the terminal, that is the railroad terminal over there, and coming in. And Once you get in here, we got to find a better place for you to park. We've got to find a place, in my opinion, that's going to keep you dry, no rain, no snow. We get in the terminal then, now we've got to find you a place in the ticket counter area, so you haven't got to be in a big line. Get your ticket, now you get down the whole room, we've got to find you more place to sit down. We've got to find a better place to find you something to eat. We hope, of course, to bring in more airlines. The conditions we have today, if XYZ airline wanted to come in here, I couldn't allow them in here because I have no place to handle them. If we build this big enough that I do indeed have a place for the extra airline, it's competition. It brings down the rates of the other airlines.
The final decision for expansion plans at the airport will be made by the airlines. After County Manager Tom Fry won the election over incumbent Lou Morin in 1987, he put all airport construction work on hold until his administration could review the plans.
I do not blame the new administration for checking into what was done in the past. They're certainly entitled to do that. There have been major changes. The new administration has done away with the idea of the bag claim area across the street, which the airlines didn't like. Now the airlines have gotten together and it's pretty well agreed that the new program will be this and that. I hate to see a program without a new garage. There's talk about a garage, but nothing's assured yet.
Do you think there's really that much need for a hotel with several hotels across the street, and it seems like they're going up in Henrietta and Greece all the time, and if the Hyatt is ever finished?
Well, take a look at these in the other areas you're talking about. They're all filled, I understand. I have had a couple local hotel owners meet at the vicinity of the airport. I will not mention names, but one of them said he wants to add 4 floors on. Another wanted to expand, but because of the noise, he couldn't. They must think there's good business here. I think there is myself.
There's a service that private pilots can provide for people in need of important medical attention. It's strictly volunteer, but the benefits a pilot receives can be worth more than money. The satisfaction of knowing that you helped someone in need of great medical attention, or perhaps even saving a life. It's the Air Lifeline, and today Aviation Highlights reporter Sue Giuseppetti has the first in a series of reports.
There has been a lot of bad publicity in recent years about airlines. Airline strikes, airline crashes, terrorist takeovers, and poor maintenance of equipment. We're here today to tell you that not all airline news is bad news. There is an airline that does not operate for profit, and so there is no possibility for anyone to strike. It is too small and loosely connected, and so there is no fear of a takeover. There is no charge to passengers, and so there is no airfare wars. And it has a perfect flying record. I'm standing at Will Air in Rochester, New York. Today we're going to tell you about one woman who is part of a quietly successful network of pilots across the country who give of their time and effort to help needy families. This nonprofit organization provides medical transports for patients who have been drained of financial resources and have nowhere else to turn. Air Lifeline was founded by Tom Goodwin, a Sacramento, California businessman and private pilot who thought he had a good idea for putting to work small private planes that had been sitting idle. But before his idea could be put into operation, Goodwin needed a clearly defined purpose. He also needed pilots.
Well, air ambulances charge for one thing, and they can provide more services for an indigent person. The only thing that Air Lifeline can provide is oxygen if a patient needs it. Otherwise, they have to be able to get in and out of the plane by themselves and to be able to sit in the seat.
Carol has flown 3 missions for Air Lifeline. While there are more than 450 Air Lifeline pilots nationwide, there are only 22 in New York. Of these, Carol and her husband are the only pilots in this area who volunteer for the program. Can you tell us, how did you hear about Air Lifeline and why did you volunteer for it?
I read about it, I think in one of the 99's newsletters at one time, just about a meeting that they had had, or some aviation publication, and called, they had George Benedict's name. He's a man who lives up along the Hudson in New York State, and he coordinates all the Air Lifeline flights, missions, we call them, for this state in this area.
Along with the uniqueness of the nature of this volunteer act, there is another reason that this program is so special. Pilots like Carol not only give of their time and skill, but they are not even reimbursed for 1 penny of the cost of flying the plane. While the pilots are not reimbursed, the costs that they incur are tax deductible. But, as Carol says, pilots who fly for Air Lifeline are not concerned about being compensated. Carol, what kind of missions have you flown? I know you've flown 3 missions so far. What have those missions entailed? Can you tell us?
2 of them entailed picking up a patient in Utica, New York. So I flew from Rochester to Utica and then took Seal and her husband, Ernie, to Baltimore, Maryland. She was going to Johns Hopkins University. She has, for treatment, she has cancer of the liver. And her husband has to go with her because he has Alzheimer's disease. And she can't leave him at home alone, so she has to take him along and take care of him. And so twice I have picked them up and taken them down. The 3rd mission was a little baby from Strong Memorial Hospital in Rochester, and who has a hemangioma on his spine. He's 18 months old. And I took he and his young mother from here to New Haven, Connecticut, to Yale University Hospital.
Hey, Carol, how does that make you feel to be able to do that for those people?
Well, it makes you feel wonderful that you can help them out because they have so many medical bills to take care of, and it's very difficult for them to get transportation, to be able to afford to get transportation to go where they need to go for their medical treatment. So it's very nice to be able to help someone else out, and by using your skills as a pilot and your plane. It's very nice.
What kind of things do they talk about when you're on a mission like this? When you're flying from place to place, do you talk to the people you're helping?
Well, you talk to them before you start. Actually, with the young girl and the baby, they promptly went sound asleep and slept all the way there.
As you can see, the airplanes that transport their precious cargo are not glamorous. They are typically 2 to 4 seaters. While some missions are flown to transport time-critical cargo, such as human organs and blood, a majority of the cases are on behalf of patients who require treatment that can only be received at a medical facility far from home. The cost for treatments, such as those needed by victims of cancer, heart and eye problems, or any other long-term affliction, can wreak havoc on a family's pocketbook. And along with the desperation of trying to deal with the illness on a day-to-day basis, are the problems associated with it, such as organizing air travel, which can tear a family apart. How much notice do they give you to fly a mission like this?
Well, usually only a couple of days, because ordinarily that's one reason it's difficult, even if the people had the money to get the flights. They don't know ahead of time, so they, if you don't have a plane ticket early, you have to pay top dollar for it. And ordinarily, for instance, with Seal, she has to have her blood work done in Utica to make sure that her blood work is all right before she can go down for more chemotherapy at Johns Hopkins. So she gets the blood work done, and they give her the report, and they like to have her go within the next day or two to Johns Hopkins for her treatment. So it's always a spur-of-the-moment thing, and the same was true of the baby when they got an opening for surgery for the baby at Yale University Hospital. It was a very quick thing, so they needed to get transportation right away.
Along with the monetary benefits to a family helped by Air Lifeline are also that it solves the problem of immediacy. Many of these missions are time critical, meaning a patient cannot wait for a scheduled commercial flight in order to reach their destination, nor can they afford to wait for the time it would take to drive by car. Pilots have the luxury, however, of being able to take off on a moment's notice.
You have to basically drop everything if you can. The last time I was asked to fly, I was leaving the next day on a trip for Florida in the plane. And I had left that one day to pack and do all the last-minute things you have to do. They called me at work the day before and said, "Could you fly tomorrow?" And I thought, oh no, I won't have time, but then I thought it was more important for that baby to get there than for me to pack properly, so I said yes, and I dropped everything else and went.
Next month, learn more about Air Lifeline, how you can help the organization, or how it can help you.
Next on Aviation Highlights, we continue a discussion with Paul Roxin about the history of aviation in the Rochester area.
I did have one professional engagement in my life, and that was a time I played a saxophone over American Airlines frequency. Way back in 1936, Cy Bittner was a captain from American Airlines. He was grounded in kind of bad weather, and we saw my instrument in the office. He said, "Let's have some fun." We went into the cockpit of the American Airlines Stinson Tri-Motor. Guy Stratton, who was a flying buddy of Cy Bittner's, accompanied us. And the song I played had been popular a few years before, previous. The name of the song was "Stars Fell on Alabama." And for that rendition, Cy Bittner gave me $1, and his comments was, it sounded like Mrs. O'Leary's cow got her tail stuck in the barn door. But this is somewhat the way it went. That was the main theme from the particular number. Gus Kahns and Vic Evans. Gus is the one on the left. Gus was a professional musician, used to play oboe, played in the pit orchestra of the Eastman Theater, which eventually became the Rochester Philharmonic Orchestra. A number of Rochesterians will be saddened to learn of the passing away of Vic Evans in November of last year at Boynton Beach, Florida. Vic was one of the early pilots here in the Rochester area. He soloed at the age of 15, and at the age of 17, he was one of the young pilots at the airport who greeted Lindbergh when he visited here on July 29th, 1927, just a couple of months after his very successful, famous flight across the Atlantic Ocean. Vic was one of the first pilots in the country to perform the outside loop in an airplane. I've seen him do it a number of times, and the stress that is put on the plane and a pilot is something that very few people would ever even attempt to do. Vic flew for Gannett newspapers for a number of years, and then he went with American Airlines in 1936. He brought many other pilots to American Airlines because Vic had done such a fine job with the company. And one of the most miraculous things that Vic was ever involved in was on December 24th, 1944. He had just taken off from Detroit City Airport in DC-3, and when in the vicinity of Ypsilanti, Michigan, they were involved in a collision with a private aircraft. The private plane was a Piper Cub. The two pilots bailed out of the plane, and in the accident, part of the wing of that DC-3 was sheared off. Vic was able to put that plane down on the frozen field and without a scratch to any of the passengers or any of the crew. And an interesting sidelight of that, this was known as one of the American Airlines fleet. American Airlines had a pennant or a banner that they used to put out when a plane was on the ground and would taxi it up and prior to takeoff, just to for PR purposes. Well, when they landed and they just sat there for 2 seconds, the co-pilot turned to Vic and says, "What do I do now?" And Vic replied, "Put out the goddamn flag." And just envision what it's perhaps a good case of what Shakespeare would refer to as comic relief. And it was done. And a plane flew over later on to capture the picture that disabled American Airlines on the field with the banner still waving. I once spoke to Vic. I said, "What was your greatest thrill in flying?" And his reply was very interesting. He said the biggest kick he ever got in an airplane was several years later when he's flying. He happened to look back in the passenger compartment and who was sitting there, but none other than Charles A. Lindbergh. So Vic invited him up into the cockpit. In those days, you could, if a pilot wanted you to visit. And Lindbergh sat between two pilots. There's a little seat called a jump seat that's reserved normally for check pilots and chief pilots and so forth. And for the duration of the trip, Lindbergh was in the cockpit, but Vic was flying the airplane. Lindbergh was a passenger. And it's very interesting that this was Vic's comment on his aviation career. 1936, I had just gotten my private license, and I thought I was pretty important. And during, it was a July afternoon, and there wasn't much activity. What students you'd get were people who were, work during the day, come out in the evening, they'd fly a little bit. This monocoop circled the airport, and we could tell immediately those pilots who had money, they used to trim about 1 foot off each wing on a monocoop. Instead of having a 90 horsepower Lambert engine, they used to put a Warner engine on in it, more power. And you could recognize the Mega engine from the sound. And they put wheel pants on wheels to streamline it, so it'd pick up maybe 12, 15 miles cruising speed. Well, the plane landed, we still had the old cinder runways there, and sometimes no thermal activity, plane bounced a little bit. An inch, not an inch, maybe bounce a foot or so. Well, the plane bounced a couple of times, very minor thing. Me, the wise guy, I nudged, I think it was Elmer Page was sitting next to me. So when that pilot comes over, I said, send him over and I'll give him some instruction how to land an airplane. So I was sat there. Pilot pulled up and one of the mechanics there for the city motioned for him to go over to the gas pit. Fellow guy Stratton, he walked around the plane, we married the plane, we all sat there. Then he looked into the cockpit, and I remember his jaw dropped about a foot. Do you know who was sitting in that airplane? And I said to Skinny Page, send the pilot over and land. I'll give him some instruction how to land an airplane. Lindbergh. And his wife, Ann. They got out. Of course, we all rushed over, and there were only 10 of us. He said, I have 2 requests. He said, number 1, I'd appreciate it if you would not notify the newspapers. Number 2, please do not take any pictures. Now, this was shortly after their first son had been kidnapped and murdered and so forth ever since. So we honored his request, and he said, we'll be glad to answer any questions that you may have. So I spoke to him. Dick Richards actually met Lindbergh.
So this photograph of Charles Lindbergh was taken on his first visit to Rochester, July 29th, 1927. We will have more discussion of aviation history with Paul Roxin in the next edition of Aviation Highlights. Here's the profile on the man behind a successful flying business in the Rochester area, Bill Law Aviation. Bill Law was born in California, raised in Buffalo, and moved to Rochester about 20 years ago.
Basically, when I was a kid, I used to go out to the airport like all young kids and sit on a fence and decided that's what I want to do in my career, is become involved with flying. And I went to an aviation-related high school, and then after Vietnam, I went to a actual flight school in Florida and got all my ratings and kind of jumped in both feet. I was a intelligence specialist, and I flew in the back of bird dogs as an aerial observer and forward bomb damage estimator. I was up in the Hue Phu-Bai area, Da Nang north up to the DMZ with the 101st Airborne. I've been in every outlying field and chief pilot for several of the facilities. The one before I went on my own business was the one for Ray Highland School of Aeronautics. I was their chief flight instructor as well as their chief pilot. And in '81 I went off on my own and started my own business. I kind of have a wide variety. We go from a Grumman Tiger to a Piper Cherokee to a Cessna 150, Archers. We have a whole one-stop shopping concept here at the school, and also for the rental business. Basically, Bill Law Aviation is a flight school, a charter department, aircraft sales, and aircraft consulting. My maintenance is done primarily through Beauchard Enterprises in Batavia, but Will Air in Rochester also helps with the workload. We lease about 60% of our airplanes are leasebacks. Our charter flights range usually in about a 700-mile radius in the northeast section. However, we do on occasion go to places like Florida and New Orleans and down playing golf at the Carolinas, but mostly the business folks usually are about a 700-mile radius.
The charter flights at Bill Law Aviation mostly involve business executives.
It seems like with the advent of the many different types of airline services now in business, that it has become a lot less favorable for a businessman to go from here to, let's say, Binghamton. A lot of times he has to go from here to Pittsburgh, wait for 2 hours, then go to Binghamton, have the meeting, go back to Pittsburgh. Where in my operation, I take them right to Binghamton in a 30-minute flight and have them back here in time for lunch or dinner in most cases.
For this day and age of hub activity at most major airlines, Bill Law drew a comparison between scheduled airlines and charter flights.
It's very comparable with the fact that you've got the convenience of the aircraft on station. It's not competitive with the fact that, say, if you compare them apples to apples, because you're using a group type carrier versus your own personalized airplane transportation.
The flight school aspect of Bill Law Aviation has people from all walks of life.
We have people that work for Kodak, we have machinists, we have teachers. It's a wide variety, laborers. Everybody seems to like to fly, and the pilots, once they start, usually get what we call the aviation bug, and they continue on. Flight instructors are usually from this area. We try to employ from the Rochester area. I have employed instructors from as far away as Sweden. Sweden, the country. The operation is one that's it's a very transitional situation. Most people start with a flight instructor mode after they get their ratings, build time, and then transition to the commuter airlines. So we see them come and go on a regular basis. We offer everything up through airline transport pilot multi-engine. We have our own seaplane base, based in the Arundequoit Bay area, and all the different ground ratings necessary to achieve the flight ratings. We have 2 seaplanes at the present time. We have a Pacer on floats, which is our training machine, and then we have a Skyhawk that was converted by Penn Yan to 180 horsepower. We call it the Super Hawk, and that's what we use for rental. It's a sightseeing situation mostly, and what we do is we just go ahead and we'll contract somebody to pick them up at Arundequoit Bay and take them around the Finger Lakes and land back to Arundequoit Bay. We don't do a charter situation per se.
Aviation Highlights will do a follow-up story about seaplanes later this summer when the weather is warmer. Although Bill Law Aviation has been successful, Bill Law likes to treat each individual who uses his business as an important person.
We have grown in size over the years that we haven't forgot the person with a name, and we like to pride ourselves on the fact that we don't have a number here. Everybody's treated as a name, and everybody's special to us.
That's it for this edition of Aviation Highlights. I'm Paul Pakusch along with Sue Giuseppetti. We hope you'll be watching again in about 2 months for episode number 3 of Aviation Highlights on Cable Channel 12.